Hey, hey, hey! I'm back, and with me, another speed art. This one is of John Kramer. I think I did some tweaking to this later on before I actually started the animation, but this is pretty close to the final design. So, I uploaded the evolution of Jigsaw / Saw, or Jigsaw Explained, to my channel last weekend. So if you haven't seen it, you can check that out after you watch this video. And for it, I watched all 9 Saw movies. That's right, 9 movies. It's ludicrous. This series has so many movies. I think 7 of them came out in a row. And, you know, this was probably actually the hardest script to boil down, so I paid pretty close attention to these movies, and yeah, so while they're still a little bit fresh in my mind, I'm gonna rank them all up for you right now, from worst to best. And of course, starting at number 9 is Saw 3D, The Final Chapter. This one perhaps feels the most rushed of all the movies. Pacing-wise and filming-wise, it's pretty sloppy. That may be because they are filming it in 3D, it's a more complicated process, but either way, it's no excuse for some of the lackluster acting and least thought out death scenes. Like, how does Hoffman even have time to set up all those traps for the Nazi gang at the start? And we're supposed to believe that Jill Tuck is now setting up the games for John Kramer in the meantime. It's all a hard pill to swallow. Not to mention the Bobby Dagan character, who is going through all the main traps in the film, is probably one of the least likable protagonists so far. Although it did give us the meme of John Kramer wearing a baseball cap backwards, so there is that. But it's still not really worthy of even the Saw brand, which is saying a lot. And coming in 8th place is Saw 5. While I like learning about how Hoffman became Jigsaw's apprentice, this is probably one of the oddest movies in the franchise. I like Agent Strom uncovering Hoffman's secrets, but the game that Hoffman is forcing the 5 protagonists to go through is probably the worst part of the movie. At least for me, as all the characters are so unlikable. I know they're supposed to be, but it makes those scenes just gory for the sake of being gory, when there's no one good to root for. Nonetheless, I still somewhat enjoy this movie, and the ending is pretty good when Hoffman gets away after Strom hunts him down, although it's not enough to save it from being one of the more unlikable movies in the franchise. And in 7th place is actually going to be the latest movie, Spiral. When I was making my ranking, I thought Spiral would be kind of higher on my list, but I somehow couldn't put it higher than here. It's a competently made film. It doesn't suffer from pacing problems that plagued the previous films on my list here, but it just doesn't really feel like a Saw film, both in execution and in the villain that has taken over Jigsaw's MO. The traps almost feel boring in comparison to the ones that I'm used to, and the voice it uses for the film parts is pretty laughable. Chris Rock and Sam Jackson do a good job in their roles, but the actor who plays Shrek I just didn't find believable at all. Still, it does have its positives. The overall story of someone killing corrupt cops is good, and the cinematography here is actually probably one of the best in the series. It just doesn't quite give me what I want from this franchise. And coming in 6th place is Saw 4. It's probably one of the ones on the list that I wish I liked a lot more, but it's just a middling sequel as it stands against the previous entries. Rigg makes for a pretty good protagonist. He's sympathetic and the traps are interesting that he has to go through, but the reason why he's being put through the traps makes really not much sense, both because he's too good at his job and because he forgets to check a door before he walks through it. It's like, is this really worthy of being tested by Jigsaw? Not really in my books, but nonetheless I really like the reveals at the end when we realize that this movie is actually taking place concurrently with Saw 3, which actually makes it a paraquel, not a sequel so much as it is parallel with the other movie that came before it, and also Hoffman's reveal is pretty good. I didn't see it coming the first time around, and it opened up the series to more sequels following this entry, so I do give it props for doing that. I just feel like it comes up short compared to at least the first 3 movies in the franchise. And at number 5 is Saw 6. Now, Saw 6 is actually one of the better entries in the series. Its pacing is pretty smooth, and the main protagonist going through the traps, while not really sympathetic, does raise a lot of questions about the healthcare system in America. I'm Canadian, so I don't think too much about it, but if you get sick in America and you can't afford some crazy price treatment, you basically just die. It's insane. I also like the scenes where the FBI start to suspect Hoffman is Jigsaw's accomplice, and Hoffman just goes crazy on them. It's a great build-up. It's unfortunate that the follow-up to this film has so many problems because this entry shows that by the 6th installment of a series, you can still bring new things to the table. And if you hear some clip-clopping in the background, that's because my dog just walked in. Well, one of my dogs. Okay, he just sat down, so I'm not going to bother re-recording that last little part, but number 4 on my list is Saw 2. So, Saw 2 is actually definitely a worthy follow-up to the first movie. It's not as good as it, and you can tell that it had a higher budget so the traps are a little bit more elaborate, but it's nothing too crazy. This is also the film where we learn the most about John Kramer and why he does what he does, cementing him as a horror icon and kind of differentiating him from other slasher icons, as he really thinks he's doing a good thing when he puts these people in these traps. He's obviously completely insane, but there's just enough sympathy for him and understanding for his character to make him stand out in a field of horror icons. And also the twist here, where we find out Amanda is working alongside him, is probably the most organic twist in the sequels, as every film seems to have another twist at the end. This one feels earned and very well set up. So Saw 2 is definitely worthy of a good watch. And coming in third place is gonna be actually 2017's Jigsaw. This is one of the few Saw films I saw in theaters, and it was marketed as more or less a reboot of the franchise, although it still does carry on the same timeline as the first 7 films. I watched it with my sister right before I moved across the country to more or less start a new life of sorts, so this one I have fond memories of. It starts off with an action sequence rather than a trap, but it's exciting nonetheless, and we get introduced to Detective Halloran, who gets roped into stopping what they assume to be a copycat of Jigsaw, as at this point in the series, he has been dead for about 10 years. So as an audience, we watch assuming things are happening in the present day with like these traps, but we learn later that we're watching a prequel, and the bodies being found in the present day are the copycat killings. And in the prequel, we're watching John Kramer's first game, and the copycat is a present day survivor from those first games, Logan Nelson, who would go on to help John Kramer create his legacy. While I'm not a huge fan of like that reveal and learning that this Logan Nelson guy was apparently helping John Kramer for like the whole time that he was creating his legacy, I do like this movie quite a bit. It's pretty effective. It isn't super gory or anything. It just tells a simple story with some good twists, and that's exactly what I want from one of these films. So I think go into Jigsaw 2017 with an open mind. If you can get over the fact that they kind of retcon a little bit of the Jigsaw backstory, it's still pretty good. And in second place for me is going to be Saw 3. I think Saw 3 is probably the best sequel. It really shows how meticulous John Kramer is despite being near death, but still manages to run a new game while Amanda and he force a doctor to try to save his life. The protagonist going through the traps is also the most sympathetic of the series, simply a grieving father who maybe has taken his life for granted since his kid died, and while I question why Jigsaw would put him through more pain, his story is one of the more interesting ones in the series, and the twist at the end where he is connected to the doctor is one of the better ones, and really sets the series into motion following this film. I also have to hand it to the writers who killed off their main villain at the end of the third movie, and still had 6 more sequels left with this story. It's pretty crazy, and it's a risky move, but I think it paid off and helps to differentiate this franchise from other horror franchises. But coming in first, could it be any other movie in this franchise? It's Saw 2004. The first is, not always the best, but in this case, it is. So, Danny Glover and Cary Elwes both give great performances, and while you can feel the low budget a little bit, they do a great job of keeping it hidden most of the time. And even the twist when you're made to think Zepp is the main villain, and then you find out that he's just another victim, is amazing. Then you have Adam turn around and Jigsaw sits up from the bathroom floor. It's absolutely iconic, and the music used there is just awesome. I also really like the simplicity of the traps in this one. Just goes to show that you don't have to go over the top to make a good horror film and start an iconic franchise. So there you have it. Saw 2004 is my favorite movie in the franchise, but I really actually like a lot of the movies in this franchise. I kind of went into it because I've seen most of them before. I went into thinking this was going to be like a little bit gory, and I don't really like a lot of gory stuff. I kind of like to watch things for the story, or just if it's like kind of like cheap gory, like crappy like Friday the 13th type gore, that doesn't bother me. But like I was like remembering these as being like really gory back in the days, but once you kind of get over that, it's a story here that is actually pretty interesting. And yeah, some of the later sequels are a little bit messy, but I think overall this is like one of the more interesting horror franchises, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. Or if you don't enjoy it, I hope you guys enjoy my little animation that kind of summarizes it, because my animation is not really gory at all. So if you just want to kind of learn the basic story, that's a good way to do it as well. So I'm going to end it there, but let me know what you guys think. Should they continue the Saw series with a 10th installment? I saw them announce that, but I'm not sure if they're going to do it because Spiral didn't really make that much money. Or would you prefer that they leave it where it is right now? I'd also like to thank all my patrons, including the recently signed up Sean Sean Argelio, sorry if I'm butchering your name, and Gavin Hall. There's links to check out my latest animation on Tell It Animated down below, and until next time, I'll tell you something later.